It's time for Recipe of the Day. Sometimes on my websites, I do little tutorials about how to do something that isn't so much a recipe as a how-to. And that is today what I'm talking about, how to cut lamb chops. And this is cutting them from a rack of lamb. So as you know, I've been talking about lamb a lot recently because I've discovered that everybody in my household actually likes it, especially the chop versions, not as much always the roasts, but definitely the lamb chops, both the rib chops and the loin chops. And so I wanted to perfect it and make them as good as possible because we're having them more often. They are a little bit more expensive, but I have found a local store that often has them at on sale. And so that's been really good. And they tend to only have the rack of lamb. So that's kind of how this cutting the lamb chops came about, because I actually prefer the lamb chops cut from the rack more than I like having the whole rack. Now, why is it that I prefer the lamb chops? Well, I just think they're really cute. The little lamb lollipops, if they're Frenched, meaning that the meat and fat has been removed from the last couple inches of bone. That's often how the rack of lamb is sold. But, so they look nice. But more importantly, the rack of lamb doesn't actually cook for very long when you put it in the oven because it's not very big, right? And you're usually cooking it to kind of like a medium at most. The safe temperature according to the USDA for lamb is 145 degrees Fahrenheit, which is right around the medium point. So it's not really in the oven for a super long time. And so it doesn't really get that nice caramelization on the outside the way that you would get from other kinds of roasts, larger kinds of roasts. It's kind of like if you think about a pork tenderloin and how it doesn't really brown if you cook it in the oven, right? And so the workaround, what I do if I'm doing the rack of lamb, is to pan sear it first, and then it goes into the oven for just a short time. It still actually doesn't end up as nicely browned as I'd like, and it's kind of this extra two-step process. It takes a longer time. So I prefer the lamb rib chops, which I can season up on both sides. So you're getting seasoning where the inside of the rack of lamb would be, if you know what I mean. So you're seasoning the chops, and then they're just searing for a short time, but they get nice and brown, crisp on the outside, juicy inside. So that is my preference. I do the rack of lamb sometimes for a Sunday dinner. It's a nice presentation, but the rib chops are better. I guess the other reasons for people doing the chops over the rack is if different people that you're cooking for like their meat at different doneness levels. With the chops, it's easier to do them differently. You can cook some for longer than others, and they also just cook up so quickly. For a quick weeknight meal, if I've got some leftover carbohydrate of some kind, you're having a salad, and I can just cook up these lamb chops in just a few minutes, and that's dinner, you know? Okay, so the easiest way to cut the rack of lamb into chops is to set it on your cutting board with the rib bones pointing up at you. So it's kind of sitting on its meatiest side. And then you can see where the bones go into the meat and therefore where you're going to need to cut. And you put your knife between two of those rib bones and slice downward. Now, if you hit a little bit of bone in there, you're just going to wiggle your knife from side to side until it moves smoothly down to the cutting board. Now, usually for the quick cooking little rib chops, you're going to cut in between each bone, and a typical rack of lamb, you're going to get 8 chops from there. But for an extra special presentation, and really actually this is a reason to cut your own lamb chops, you can do the double rib chops. I never see them like this at my grocery stores ever. I've only ever had them at restaurants. So if you want that kind of really beautiful restaurant presentation of a double rib lamb chop, then you would cut between every second rib. And then you get a nice thick chop, which, kind of like I was saying before, it's going to need to be in contact with the pan for a little bit longer. So it's going to brown that little bit more. And then the inside isn't going to get overdone. So if you're somebody who likes things medium rare, but with that nice crispy outside coating, then you might want to do the double rib chops. Then they're in contact with the pan for longer, nice and brown on the outside, but still however rare you want them inside. So you can cut them as single chops, cute little lollipops, great for appetizers, or you can do the double rib chops. And that is it. I will put links in the show notes for this podcast episode for how to cook your lamb chops once you have them, how to cook the rack of lamb too, in case you do not want to do this, and then the air fryer lamb chops. You know, I told you about these not that long ago. I was amazed at how good they turned out in the air fryer. So definitely a quick and easy weeknight dinner. Try some lamb. See if your family likes it as much as mine does. They may surprise you. I will put the link for this how to cut lamb chops tutorial in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you could head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is March 9th of 2025. I'm Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast recipe of the day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.